pay a lot of attention to things like music. I find music is a huge indication of what's going to happen in fashion. So, if I start to hear that grunge is trending a little bit, it's a pretty good idea of what's going to trend in terms of product taste. So I can start looking at like the jewelry that people were wearing in the grunge era. And I know that people are going to start searching for that soon.
Welcome to Learn with Shopify. I'm Adam Levinter. What started as a way to create some custom-made jewelry as souvenirs during a backpacking trip actually kickstarted the journey of building a profitable multi-million-dollar jewelry design studio. This is how Shane Vitaly Foran started Compound Studio, and he's here with us today sharing how he built multiple brands, found production partners, expanded into retail, and managed to build an 8-figure business without seeking funding from investors. Shane, welcome to Learn with Shopify.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
When we were talking earlier, one thing that stood out to me is that you don't necessarily have this background as an entrepreneur. You studied poli-sci, you studied marketing, you had some experiences with Red Bull. But way back when in grade 6, you said you knew back then you wanted to be a founder.
I don't think I knew I wanted to be a founder. I don't even think I knew what that was in grade 6. I just had this idea that I wanted to design and sell things to people. I was a big Lego fanatic. That's, I think, where it started. And I thought, I can build some pretty cool stuff with Lego. Maybe I could build something else and people would like it.
Let's go back to the origin story of Vitaly, which started circa 2010 back in Bali, was it?
Yeah, exactly. It happened really organically. I wasn't planning to start a business. So, I had forgotten this idea of becoming a founder. Went and studied poli-sci. I thought maybe I'd become a lawyer. Really glad I didn't go that route, but no offense to lawyers. Yeah, I just was backpacking. I saw some people making some really cool jewelry. Nothing I would really wear, but they were clearly talented. And I drew something effectively on a napkin. It was really that kind of basic 2-finger ring, had it made for me, and thought it was pretty cool. Stuck around, kept refining it, brought them home as gifts for friends, and kind of realized I had something. And I literally started slinging them out of a backpack for the first few months. And then I was like, there might be something here. Maybe I could have a little side hustle.
So one thing to sell out of a backpack, another thing to start a business online.
Yeah, exactly. I went online pretty quickly though, just because I wasn't sure what else to do. I think I might have used one of those old kind of very simple builders. I remember somebody sent me a screenshot recently of the initial website. It's pretty hilarious. It'd actually probably be trendy at this point because it was so bad.
So you incubate this business and you didn't have much money. You were saying you took your first $10,000 from a friend of yours.
Yeah, so I started with $3,000. It was the last out of my student credit line. I sent that all off to Bali, just had as many rings made as I could. And when they showed up, I started selling them, but that was kind of when I first started learning about Cashflow. And I quickly realized I needed more cash. So my roommate at the time, who's now my business partner, Jason, said, I have 10 grand, I can throw that in. It actually took 3 months before I was willing to take it from him. I was kind of sketched out about the idea of working with a close friend. But he eventually talked me into it because we're both very logical people that can kind of talk through things. And, that was the start of the story.
So I think a lot of people would be interested in what makes a good partnership work amongst friends. And you guys have this history, so how did you make it work over time?
Yeah, it hasn't been without its challenges. We've definitely had moments where, there's some explosiveness, but in the end it's worked out really well because I think we both understand that we need each other. We're both very different. His strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. And I think that it's been a really strong balance that way.
Did you have the vision for Vitaly as a brand when you first started manufacturing these rings? How did you start to expand? How did you start to build the brand over time?
No, I had no vision at all. So, maybe I could sell some of these rings and pay for another backpacking trip. But weirdly, I had my backpack that I was slinging them out of with me, and I was in a store on Queen Street, and I knew the owner was in there. So I just asked her, is this something that you would ever stock? And she bought, I think I had 11 rings on me. She bought them all off me on the spot. I didn't even have pricing really. And she just said, what's your actual price? Okay, well, wholesale price would be about 50% of that. Go to Staples, get me a receipt book and write me an invoice. And that's kind of how I started. So after that happened, I realized, okay, I might be onto something here. At that point, I didn't even have a brand name. I wasn't thinking about that kind of thing. So she said, what's the brand? And I had Vitaly tattooed on the inside of my arm. It was, long story, weird family history, but it was my last name. And thought, that actually sounds pretty designer. I think I could just go with that.
Tell me about the evolution of that brand and also how you start to iterate around this idea of incubating other brands, which is sort of where you're at now with Compound Studio.
like most of this company, it happened pretty organically. Really what happened was when I started Vitaly and I kind of realized that it was going to develop into a brand and that I needed to start thinking about an identity for it, it kind of found its own identity because I hadn't really set out with a plan. That said, I grew up on rock and roll and motorcycles and tattoo culture and that kind of community. So I was like, I kind of want to do something now that I have this skill set in the world that I know. So I created Clocks and Colors. I really didn't think it was going to do much. I just thought it would be a cool little side project for me, just something to keep me satiated creatively. It kind of rocketed out of the gates as well and quickly caught up to Vitaly, and we just started growing them in tandem.
What about this idea of building a brand, building a community around what you know versus what you think is going to resonate with the market? Do you think that's a good strategy for other entrepreneurs to follow?
I think it's the best strategy. So with Vitaly, even though Clocks and Colors was a huge part of my lifestyle, at the time I was also very into electronic music and the things that the Vitaly brand was built around. And when I started to feel that I wasn't anymore, I kind of handed the reins off to he's still the creative director, Zach Vitiello. And he really started to build out the visual identity that you then saw over the following years. And he's since kind of continued to do that and has pivoted as needed. But it became a little bit more authentic to him, which was a good thing.
Tell me the structure of Compound Studio now and what it looks like across all of these brands. What is the setup?
Effectively, Compound Studio is like the umbrella. And then we have 3 brands, soon to be 4 brands under that umbrella. So you have Vitaly, the first brand, Clocks and Colors. We launched another brand about 2.5 years ago called Etah Love. And then we're launching another brand, I think in 2 months, called Every Heart. Most of them have completely independent teams now. That's something that we've been working on. So if you looked at the business a year ago, everyone worked on every brand. And that worked for a long time, but we've kind of reached this scale where it's just not possible anymore. And people started to pick their favorites. You can see that certain people identify more with one than the other. And so we started to try to, silo them a little bit. So you still have people that cover all of them, like Joe, who you're going to speak to later. He's the chief marketing officer, but he's also the president for Vitaly. So chief marketing officer for all of Compound. He oversees all of the marketing. But he's also very focused on the Vitaly brand in terms of direction and, day-to-day execution. But generally, it's, people are focused on their own brands now, full teams.
Mm-hmm. What about studying the market? Do you look at trends? Are you watching sort of consumer behavior and having that influence the brand direction at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe not in the traditional sense, like if you were to go talk to a lot of the big consulting firms, we're not doing it the way they're doing it. I think that's been a big part of my role from the jump. I've always been big on watching what's actually happening in real life. I'm not a huge consumer of things on the internet. Like I don't spend a lot of time looking at Instagram, et cetera, to figure out trends. I really honestly just spend time walking around the city. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I find that it's kind of the most authentic representation of what's happening in the world right now. And so that's kind of my market research. I just look around and go, okay, what are people starting to do right now? Where does that naturally kind of go from here? Pay a lot of attention to things like music. I find music is a huge indication of what's going to happen in fashion. So, if I start to hear that grunge is trending a little bit, it's a pretty good idea of what's going to trend in terms of product taste. So I can start looking at like the jewelry that people were wearing in the grunge era. And I know that people are going to start searching for that soon. Perfect example right now, pop punk is starting to become trendy. You're seeing a huge revival of a lot of the bands that I grew up on, like bands like Blink-182, but you're seeing it modernized with people like Machine Gun Kelly, and even Avril Lavigne has a huge comeback right now, which is super cool to see. And so because of that, I know what to think about in terms of style.
Other than music, where do you draw inspiration for these brands?
Music was the biggest one for sure. Early days, especially with Vitaly, it was architecture as well, just for the aesthetic. If you look at, the first probably 6 or 7 years, everything was very, very simple, very structural. And I will say that one thing we do with Clocks and Colors, typically think about a theme for each collection, and then we'll build from there. But it still doesn't perfectly capture like how we go piece by piece.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that founders should take a look at the market and see how saturated it is before they launch their brand? Or is it something that's sort of like instinctive in the sense that You sort of trust your gut, trust your instinct, and go with how you feel.
I'm a trust your gut guy, and I know that a lot of people in the business world hate that, especially people in the finance side of this world. But for me, my instincts have always served me best. If I start to see that the market is really saturated, I know that by the time I can bring out product that looks like that, I've already missed the window anyway. So, certainly I'm paying attention to that to a point, but I'm not out there doing huge kind of studies around other competitors in our space. Like, of course, we're aware of who they are. We look at them from time to time. But in fact, I often actually tell my team to pay less attention. For example, one of the pillars for Clocks and Colors is really just anti-fast fashion. Like, it's really focused on just what our DNA is and what we want to do and consistency with it. So, I try to push that kind of idea throughout the business.
You launch with these rings initially for Vitaly. You expand into other products. How did you find your suppliers? How did you find your manufacturers?
Oh man, it's so funny. People often reach out and they just ask for your suppliers. And you've probably seen that there's this trend now where it's like, you should be totally transparent with who your suppliers are. And you have a lot of brands out there, and props to them for doing this, but they'll post who all their suppliers are. I can't even imagine doing that because of how much work it took to find ours. I'll never forget the first time that I went to China with zero money. I'm, in Shenzhen or Guangzhou trying to take the train, having no clue if I'm going to the right place. It was terrifying. It was truly horrifying. But, the way that we did it initially was the classic way, jumped on the internet, checked Alibaba, checked Google, did whatever we could and sent people emails. But I quickly realized that there were better ways to do it. Go to trade shows, start kind of casing several different suppliers, etc. But to put it into perspective, before we found the main jewelry supplier for Vitaly, we have several, but we have kind of a core supplier. We probably worked with over 20 factories. It was a nightmare. It was a really, really rough process. So when people ask for my supplier, I'm like, I want to give you this because I know how much it sucks, but if they started to get in the way, slow down my supply, etc., I couldn't deal with that. It's just too much to get there,
Celebrities and influencers. So you've got growth that's come to Vitaly and some of your other brands off of these influencers and celebrities that are wearing different pieces. Two-part question. One, how did you find these influencers or celebrity partners? And how do you manage those relationships over time?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but we've been doing it for a long time. So I think it's become kind of natural for us. We were really, really early to social media, like Instagram, for example, very, very early days. And we realized quickly that, we could pay for, at the time they weren't called influencers yet, right? We could pay a blogger or we could pay, just a person with a huge following on social media to make a post and it would drive a ton of traffic. We realized over time that strategy needed to change. There was a lot more competition. Bigger brands started realizing they could pay more, etc. These days, we have built out a huge, huge, huge network of everyone from influencers to stylists, etc., that we just consistently seed with product. And it's kind of it's a mutually beneficial relationship. If they continue to promote us, we continue to send them product. If not, it's probably just not a relationship worth working on. But we have an entire team dedicated to that. And it's a hugely important part of our strategy.
As you've scaled the business, obviously cash flow, which we talked about early on, still super important.
Yep.
You guys are bootstrapped, mostly bootstrapped at this point.
Yep.
You've not taken any outside financing to this point.
In total, we've taken $158,000. So we raised $58,000 early on, which to us at the time was the craziest amount of money. We built out a business plan and we were like, if we have $58,000, we can survive for the next 6 months. We can do this. And we managed to do it. I think back to our original business plan. It was over 100 pages. It's hilarious. Just, I got some template from my university and thought, okay, this is the way you do it. I need to find that because it would be so funny. But yeah, we took that $58,000 and grew for a long time. Later on, we ended up taking $100,000 at some point, not really for the cash, but just to bring that person into the business. And yeah, outside of that, that's it. We've sold some secondary, et cetera, but the business has grown on its own cash flow.
Okay, so looking back on your career as a founder, you're over a decade in now. What advice would you give to your younger self or your younger entrepreneurial self?
All right, two things. The first, drink less coffee. When I started out, I was drinking so much coffee. It was cheap, and coffee's the best thing ever. But it's already stressful enough starting a business. You don't need to be packing in caffeine. Like, it's no wonder I was, constantly mind-blowingly anxious. But beyond that, I would say, don't chase the money. And like, I know that sounds cheesy and cliche and all, however you want to state that, but at least in a creative business, as soon as you start doing that, people smell it. There have been periods where we got consumed by it. And to be fair, there's been really difficult periods where we weren't sure if we were going to survive, and we thought we need to do what it's going to take, right? But truthfully, it's never been the right thing. Like, as soon as we went back to doing what we really love and creating products that we're really excited about, that's when it did well. So yeah, I would say that's it.
Improving cash flow is a smart move for any business. If you're looking for one area to focus on, this is it. That's why we've put together a cash flow forecast template to help you streamline the process and save you time and stress. With this template, you'll be able to easily forecast expenses and revenue, so you can predict shortfalls and know when to invest in growth. Click the link below to claim your free download now.